they were the only ones at some organizations that were still working, through COVID, and never took a time off.
Welcome to the Circuit Magazine, the #1 source of information on protection matters, the industry-leading magazine for all security professionals who want to stay ahead of the game.
Duty of care for protectors and corporate security. Today, a slightly different tack to the Circuit Magazine podcast in that we're recording from a recording at the Corporate Security Modernization Forum Tri-State just last month, with Armando Leon and Jonathan Pirillo both coming as themselves. What's different is that we're looking at how we build the leadership skill set in the context of looking after your staff. So we're going to look about, how do they set that vision? What is vision setting skill set when relating to your own staff? What legal framework does the leader have to take into consideration when it comes to health and safety? And how can you protect protectors when you've tasked them with protecting others? Lots of interesting questions, perhaps one that's very good for the festive season as we have a little bit of downtime and think about how we grow either our business or our team. As I said, this has come live from the Corporate Security Modernization Forum Tri-State, which we held very successfully just last month. And I really hope you appreciate the different angles coming to us from the world of corporate security.
And now, let's meet one of the contributors to the Circuit Magazine.
We're live at the 4th Annual Corporate Security Modernization Forum Tri-State, and we are still talking modernization, but we're talking about the leadership skill set and, the way in which duty of care and corporate security modernization can come together. We're very, very pleased to be joined by Armando Leon, Senior Manager Security Infrastructure Protection at Washington Metropolitan Area Transport Authority, and Jonathan Pirillo, Manager Security and Life Safety at Munich Re. Frank has had to go elsewhere, but we will relay to him our thoughts. Lovely to have you on. How are you enjoying the day so far?
Oh, very good, very good. Great panelists so far. Thank you for letting us join.
Very good, very good. Well, we're excited to talk modernization. It's important because otherwise we just go in a random direction, modernizing, spending money in a particular way, whether corporate money or our own training money. And so it's important to look at this from a wider perspective. But, and maybe I'll start with you, Jonathan, when we talk about the leader of tomorrow, what type of leader are we talking about? We already talked about different functions, including fraud and investigations and all sorts. But what is this leader we're talking about?
So as we kind of progress into leadership roles and what we're looking at here, we're looking at a couple different types of leaders throughout the security industry. So we have our end users, right? So we have our CSOs and our SSEs within the organizations, and then we also have the security leaders that are specialty leaders, right? So there's a specific area in security that they are top notch in, right? And both are equally important, but they both kind of present similar and different patterns, right? So the more you specialize, the more you really dig down into one area, whereas the CSOs and SSEs become more broad. And I think that as we evolve and as modernization comes here, I think you're going to really see a large evolution of soft skills and having those skills that reflect the organization that they represent. So the more technological we get, I think the more we have to rely on our soft skills.
Okay, so soft skills and of course looking after people is kind of a soft skill. We talked in the opening panel about finding out their motivations. Maybe I don't want this to go down the insider threat pathway, right? Because what I want to do is say, actually, we just want to get to know our staff and make sure they're not in a bad place. Armando, what then does this make this leader sort of do? What is it framed as? Because are we looking for them to set the vision, or reflect the organization they protect? I guess I wanted to get a bit more granular.
Yeah, and I think I agree with Jonathan. I think the leader now with these skills, right, is expanding, right? So I think before, maybe a direct expertise in the organization that you're working at wasn't as key to being a successful leader, whereas now I think that becomes a more important role that that player does, right? So understanding really the organization and how you're protecting that organization and really getting down to your people that are doing the protecting, right? So protecting the protectors, as we've discussed in the past, right? So the duty of care is really understanding their role and setting that goal and that vision. And I think it's really important that as a leader nowadays, you do set that vision and that mission that should reflect what your organization's goal is, right? But you understanding how it is that you play that role in securing your organization. I think it's really key for the leaders of the future as we modernize.
Yeah, because otherwise you're just a boss, and we don't have a kindness games panel this time round, but we did on the Great Lakes event. But the idea that you're simply taking into consideration their home life, their wants, their fears. It's actually not rocket science. It's what people do in interviews, and it's what people do with those performance reviews anyway. Actually, quite clunkily. I'm sure everyone has had a clunky performance interview where they go, "So, tell me your goals and your own motivations." It's like, I'm not just going to spill that for you, like you're going to hold it against me. So I think it's got to be more nuanced, and you've got to work with HR partners and all of that. But we mentioned a few OSHA things. Jonathan, I guess it depends on the sector, but what legal considerations should we be thinking about as we try and build a duty of care in?
Yeah, absolutely. And as far as modernization too, right? So how is duty of care changing? And it's not only technological, it's also cultural, right? So we have huge initiatives out there. We have DE&I out there. We have leisure work, right? So business leisure, people are traveling all around the world because of the ability to work hybrid. We have other technologies that are entering the space. So as far as a company providing a credential versus we're potentially even shifting to where the employee would be providing a credential that we would ingest. So where does all of this leave us? Where does all of this put us as far as duty of care? And my answer is always semper gumby, right? Always flexible. So we need to be able to identify exactly where that is. And that again goes back to building those close relationships with your executives at your company, because it's not just one person that can sit down and draw a line. You need to involve legal, you need to involve HR so you can understand what these challenges are and where they're coming into play. You need to have local experts because there's going to be different laws throughout the different parts of the globe and throughout the different parts of the US. So it really goes back to soft skills, right? Being able to include the right people in the room in order to make these decisions collectively so that everybody's reading off of the same sheet of music.
But then, what's to stop you being HR? Like, why, or do you know what I mean? Like, it just feels like there should be more convergence there. As HR are often described as eyes and ears. They are, right. They are eyes and ears for the C-suite. The C-suite ask a question. HR, they're like Sandra Stibbard, but internally, aren't they? They go and investigate. So I'm curious how that balances, Armando, because if you're being a leader and you're championing duty of care for your protectors, how do you find out like how they are? Like some of them might have money troubles, some of them might have personal problems. How does one find that out?
Yeah, and I think that I think as we think of modernization and really thinking of taking care of your people, right? I think especially what I found successful in my leadership roles is creating that team environment, right? So that environment where yes, you are the leader, but like you mentioned before, right? You're not just the boss, right? So you're the leader that actually cares for the people that are doing, the hard work, right? Let's be real, right? So the people that are standing on the streets overnight, right? The people that are standing in the platforms, like for example, I'm in the transportation business, so the people that are standing in the platforms and dealing with those crimes. So I think it's really understanding where they're coming from and really having that relationship. I think the leader of the future really doesn't just give orders and give direction. I think the leader of the future builds this team environment, right? Like, I come from a military and law enforcement background, and I think the most successful teams are the ones that have that team environment, right? It's not just I'm doing this, I'm doing this, I'm doing this. I think as a leader, you have to understand that without your team, without your team of professionals out there, there's no work being done, right? So if you're not protecting them, if you're not taking care of them, if you're not learning about them, because you're right, financial problems could bring about great trouble, right, to a security environment. Divorces, right, and then we come into, then you dwell into, mental illness, or things that workplace violence, right? So kind of preventing those things as a leader, I think, in all environments, not just security, but I think all environments, learning about your team and learning what changes throughout the time can really prevent things such as that, right?
And I guess that's an active interest rather than you will obey because I have a special forces background. I mean, I'm not saying that anyone in the SF does that, right? But it's more like, right, this is something new. This is a transition. This is people management. It's HR. There's a duty of care. And yes, I know with Christian later we'll touch on what happens when you send your protectors somewhere dangerous, because that's a different expectation than if you send them somewhere, less dangerous. But I'm wondering, how can then the leader seek to protect the organization whilst protecting the protectors who are protecting the organization? Jonathan, I mean, how does one balance that? Because, like, the organization will say, deploy your staff during COVID to look after the doors, and you'll be like, well,
right. And it's about perceiving your staff as human beings as well, right? So having that very real conversation and saying if it's not fit for anybody, then these people are anybody's too. And so there's that aspect of it. And protecting is also more than just beyond the physical, right? It's also reputational and other things like that. And so we always try and make a culture in my staff where there's an arena where you can actually make mistakes, right? As long as we can learn from them, as long as they're not to the point where they get out of hand. I would much rather my team make mistakes and learn from them than to go through their workday being afraid to make a decision. So, and that has led to such an incredible culture of being able to identify those potentially dangerous situations well ahead of getting there. So it gives them a voice to speak up with, and it gives them empowerment and the ability to make decisions.
And that's maybe key, because then that is another element of duty of care. Maybe it's not an OSHA statute to make them feel involved, right? OSHA's not going to say they've been feeling involved at 2.5 instead of whatever level, but it's something in the soft skill variety. And Deborah in the audience says no question is an insult. Which I think is good. So Armando, how can we encourage our staff to not have a silly question or not find any question insulting? How can you I mean, do you literally say just ask me questions, but like, is there any environment we can set up to enable that?
Yeah, and I think that's interesting, right? Because I think we hear that quite a bit, right? No, no stupid questions. But then it depends who's answering that question, right? And how that question is being answered, and what environment you're creating when these questions are being asked, right? Because, I think some leaders fall into a situation whereas, it is this way because I say it is, or because this is my experience and this is what I know how it is. Whereas, there are times where, you run into those questions where, like, why is this being done, or why are we doing this? And I think really taking that time to really talk to your staff as far as, having them understanding that you're caring for their questions, right? You want their questions and their input. I think Jonathan put it nicely when you think of your staff as human beings, and I think a lot of leaders fall into a systematic process where they don't treat their staff as human beings, right? They're just numbers, right? It's just a staff, especially really large companies, right? They just feel, it's just a number, right? So I think, individual or first line leaders or supervisors is really important to treat those people as humans. Treat your staff as humans, and really, when those questions come about, really have that conversation where you're accepting those questions, and maybe they bring up a topic or they bring up a point that might be important, or maybe something you didn't think about, right? Because I think that's the other thing that as leaders we have to really think about, is that we can't think of everything, right? Nobody can, right? It's just not possible. There's different avenues. People have different ways of thinking. People may see things. Even the newest person in your staff, might see something that, hey, maybe you didn't think of it this way, and really welcoming that and making them understand that, hey, if you find something that's a better route and a better choice, maybe we'll go that way, right? It won't just be just because I said so because I'm the leader, right? And I think that's the environment that creates that welcoming for the questions and welcoming for like, hey, let's maybe work together alongside, rather than top down leadership, right? You kind of like make that across the board a little bit, kind of like a partnership, right? Because at the end of the day, right, you don't succeed as a team without those that are working, with you and for you, right? So without creating that environment, I think you're not going to be able to do it.
Yeah, and I appreciate Deborah in the audience also says if you train and educate your staff, you'll have less simple questions. And so yeah, that is a good mantra, I suppose. I tell you what, I didn't ask you this in the pre-call, but I kind of think maybe it's a good question actually. Could you share a little bit, both of you, about your own journeys? Because that's one thing we don't really explore. People transitioning from military or not from military, or from X and Y, and how you become a leader, and whether or not soft skills have featured in said progress. I sorry to spring it on you, but I wonder, maybe Jonathan, I'll start with you. Well, can you tell us a bit about your journey?
Absolutely. So my journey into security is a little bit weird. It's always just kind of been there in the background, right? So even while I was in the military, I was active duty in the United States Marine Corps, based out of San Diego. And even while I was in the military, I had a side job working security at Chargers games. And it's always been a side job, and it had always been something that, when I was going to university and college and things like that. And then while I was doing that, I ended up running into my today mentor, who said, hey, you know what? You're actually pretty good at this. This should be your full-time thing. Stop trying to chase other things. And I had gone through a bunch of different transitions. After the military, I went into skip tracing and things like that. I'd gone and I'd gotten some other jobs just doing basic business things. And I was in school to be an actuary. And I ended up just falling in love with security after he peeled back the veneer a little bit. And so that's one of those things where I really have to say that you can't understate in this industry the power of mentorship.
And I really appreciate that you said that you were trained to be an actuary, because, and I've said this so many times, we need to get actuaries on this event, because we had a colleague from a UK insurer, and he said he wants to make the business case for how much he's saved the company in preventing incidents. And he went to the actuaries and he said, tell me, can you help me? Give me the numbers. I don't know, does that help you be able to kind of quantify your role?
It does. So not only quantifying the role and quantifying the risk, but also just the fact that the business is curious what security organizations do in the first place, right? So being able to have all of the amount of data that we have, I mean, access control systems spit out millions and millions of lines of data, and nobody takes a look into what they mean. The actuary, it's best way that I can explain it with having that background is that I'm not afraid to tackle the math, right? So it's not that we went through the training or went through other things like that, but it just becomes a little bit less intimidating, and we know the methodologies to kind of approach it. And so when we get to it, we know when we need to visualize or when we need to go into spreadsheets and things like that, and you can get kind of a better feel for what you're trying to sift through. And it's been absolutely tremendously helpful, especially as we start realizing how much data the corporate security organizations have.
Yeah, and that's something that a lot of the promise of new tech seems to be generating rather than solving. But anyway, we'll get into that. Armando, how has soft skills or team building really featured in your progression? Has it been literally, oh, Armando, I like your background in the military, or has it actually been a bit more organic? Thinking, right, you've actually had a lot of soft skills.
Yeah, so like Jonathan, my background really started in active duty military, and then short time after that, I was a police officer in Miami, and then actually security wasn't something that I really thought I would get into. I think there's a perception of security from a law enforcement perspective, right? That kind of taints it when you see security in some areas as a law enforcement officer. So I actually, when I moved to where I live now. Security was something that I got into while I was going to school, and I got a chance to really start from the bottom. So I was the protector on the street, right on the ground, and I think I progressed that way, which I think it helped me understand and helps me kind of go to the direction of a leader that I would like to be, right? Because we always strive to continue to improve. So because I've been on the ground, right? I've been there, in the cold overnight, walking the streets as that security personnel. So that's helped me understand. And obviously through the time, I've had some mentors, right, and some bosses that came and some leaders that provided kind of like that guidance and that team building. I think really the team building portion of it has been something that I've been able to use in really other aspects where and I have not been in security, right? So there was a portion of my career where I led a team that I was not security oriented, but I still built that team, right? And I think that when I left, I still get calls from them and text messages and emails all the time. And they were not security professionals, but I was able to build that team, right? Bring those skills that I came with from security and law enforcement, and actually build the team where my staff knew that I cared for them. And I think that's really important. And that's why I said that I think that transcends through many more organizations than just security, but I think it's important in our field, right? Because we're asking our protectors to do things that you're not asking everybody, right? You're asking these protectors to, protect an organization from, a potentially dangerous activity, right? So you want them to trust you and trust your judgment and your calls and your procedures and your policies, right? You want them to trust that. And the only way you can gain that trust is by building that team, right? If they can't trust you, they're not going to do the work that you're asking them to do, right? And that just hurts the organization in the end.
Yeah, and there's an element of credibility because you've done it, which is one of the arguments why we can't literally take someone from anywhere. They need some track record. But Amanda, how then can you recruit for those same skills? Because it's not like someone can show you a piece of paper and said, "Yeah, I was very caring. Like I've got the certificate in soft skills." Or maybe there is a way. Maybe there is a way. How do we recruit for that throughout the next generation?
Yeah, and that's a challenge, right? That's a challenge we run into specifically in this field, right? In the security field, because you have personnel who are in security for the short term, right? Using it as a kind of like a transitioning point, and then you have those that have been in it, for their entire career, right? So how do you I guess hire for that, and that's a challenge, right? That's a challenge. But I think really getting to know people, I think through the interview process, right there, I've been through interview process where it's been very rigid, right? They ask you questions, they ask you 5 questions, and then okay, that's the end of the interview. Whereas I've been to interviews where you build kind of like a rapport, right? And I think that is the one good way to kind of start judging how someone's going to be and how they're going to fit within your team, right? And I think building that team and understanding what you're looking for is what's key. But I think it starts right at the interview process, right? It starts at the process where you build that rapport and you have those conversations. It's like not just where have you been or what have you done, but maybe how have you accomplished that, or what kind of environments have you successfully been in. And I think that's what's really provides that kind of that frame into you understanding of how this person is going to fit within your team. But I mean, like I said, it's a challenge, right? Because you never know. Some people can interview very well, where some people can interview really bad, and you lose that. So I think what's important is building that rapport right from the start, where that person feels comfortable with you, and they can share that information with you, and then you can gather more details as it moves on.
Yeah, and yeah, everyone has had that experience of the interview where you're like, I wish I could have said more, or I said too much, or But then going back a step, maybe this is for you, Jonathan. Like, before you get to the interview, how do we sift these CVs? Somebody said on a previous event, HR doesn't know what they're looking for, and they just recruit the wrong CVs. And I wonder, that can't be true, because surely there's a hiring manager involved in there. And then I suddenly tweaked, maybe it's the promise of new technology, where they go, well, I've got thousands of CVs to sift, so I'm going to use tech. Where maybe some good CVs get thrown out. How much truth is there to that, and how much involvement have hiring managers really got in corporate security?
And it really depends on the position, right? So a very senior security position should have certain things on their CV. It should have certain experiences. So you want to make sure that they have experience in the same industry. You want to make sure that they have certain certifications and certain backgrounds in certain networks. Whereas if you're looking at somebody that's closer to patrol, or somebody that's maybe more like an analyst function, there's going to be different things that you're looking for. Particularly in my analyst functions, I actually look to make sure that I'm employing a very diverse workforce, because it makes them very nimble and able to tackle things in very different ways. So generally, when I'm hiring, I do tell HR or I do tell the outsourced company, I would prefer to waste more time with interviews to meet the right candidate. So if you think that something is in line and you're on the edge, put them in the pile and we'll talk to them. Because we don't necessarily know exactly what it is that we're looking for. Sometimes we'll just know it when we see it. And so I think it's good to have a wider funnel with this, because we are trying to solve for a very, very diverse threat environment. So it may not, be exactly that perfectly laid out CV that we're looking for.
And I'd be interested in your thoughts, because when we were on with Sandra, we sort of were wondering if there could be more communication between, I mean, and it does depend on the company, right? But between fraud, investigations, and corporate security. Now, in some sectors, I feel that you're going to want to poach them. Like, they'll be really good. What should we do when we want to take internally? Maybe we want the concierge staff to be a frontline guard. I don't know. Like how do we manage that?
Yeah, it really depends on the position, right? So sometimes we do poach. We see that somebody performs very well in another environment, and we reach out to them directly. Other times we have somebody that's in an outsourced role for a long period of time with us, and we decide to bring them internal and make them an offer that way. It really depends, right? But I think that it starts with what the position is that you're trying to fill, and what the skills are that are there. Would it be better to have somebody in that role that has been outsourced previously, that's coming in there, or would it be better to have somebody that's used to operating in the end user organization? And then again, we're only talking about from the end user perspective, not from the specialist section. So from the specialty section, we're talking about a much narrower pool.
So, Armando, does this mean that, in fact, we want a broader pool, and we're gonna have to look at this broader pool from some untraditional backgrounds? Yes, you see here in the UK, I'll use UK so we don't look at the US in this. In the UK, there are organizations, and that everyone has come from the military police. That's just their background. They've all come from there. They're buddies. But for the modern professional, should we be opening it up? And I mentioned concierge. People during the pandemic were actually saying, "Oh, I think it's got to be about customer service, so I'm going to take all the hotel concierge staff." I don't know if it actually happened, but what additional backgrounds do you think we should be open to?
Yeah, and that's a good question. I think I agree with Jonathan. I think it depends on the positions, right? I think you're right. I think there are positions where, that concierge and customer service is very important, especially in the industry that you're in, right? You could be in face fronting staff where, that makes or breaks the visits of your particular guest, right? Let's say you're at a museum, right? And you bring somebody who's got this rigid background, it's only been in the military, it's only been law enforcement, and you put them right in the front, that might give off a different kind of feel that you want for something like that, right? An amusement park of something like that, where, a more of like a customer service oriented, with some background in security, with some experience, right? But you could always train the good employee, right? I think that's a good key to think about as well, right? You can train somebody who is willing to learn and provide them that knowledge and that those skills, right? That you want them to have, but then you train, you hire, what you're looking for, right? In that front, like you're saying, like we're talking about, right? Customer service, somebody who's just really talking to the public, who's bringing that face of your organization. Depends what you want to present, right? Whereas maybe in areas where it's really high crime, and you really need that protector, you really need that ex-law enforcement or ex-military person there. I think that's where that person gets hired, right? So I think as a professional, as a leader, as we look into the future, I think that person has to understand that. Right. That person has to be involved. That hiring manager has to really understand, what are the roles that we're asking these protectors and these professionals to actually do nowadays? Because, as we learned during COVID, right, we did a lot more, specifically during that time, than we originally did, right? They were involved in many other things other than just protecting the organization. Now they were the only ones at some organizations that were still working, through COVID, and never took a time off. So I think they were the kind of like the masters of it all, or at least they had to be aware of it all. So I think knowing that and knowing what roles these professionals are going to go is important for these leaders, as we modernize, right?
Yeah, like it. And in the audience, Deborah says your culture needs to support the learning. Um, which I think is really key. So, all right, kind of bringing it to a conclusion. Why don't I ask what you hope we could achieve from an event such as this? I know modernization is very broad, but let's say, Jonathan, at the end of the day, today, where do you think we could sort of arrive to? What sort of conclusions do you think I should try and hash out?
Well, from today, I think we're moving forward with a framework, right? We're recognizing that security in the entire industry is not what it was 20 years ago, and it sure isn't going to be the same thing 20 years from now. So, what are we looking at as far as we've evolved so far? And we've seen the introduction of soft skills a lot more, but we still have a very strong foundation in crisis management, right? And I think that no matter where we go, no matter where we end up, I think that that's still going to be required. I think that there's still going to be a strong foundation of that. That needs to be continued, and it needs to be expanded upon, right? Because the crisis 20 years from now could be completely different than it is now, especially as we get into multi-environment threats. So our understanding of that is what I think really needs to change. Look at your organizations, look at how they're evolving to face the modern world, and we can join in stride.
Like it. And Armando, any thoughts from you? I know you've been on a few of these now. Where can we possibly hope to get to at the end of today that we haven't gotten to already?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think as professionals we modernize, right? Like I think your topic is great because it's really understanding that we're changing, right? We're ever changing, and being stuck in your old ways is really going to leave you behind. And as a leader, as we move forward, technology is changing more, rapidly, right? Cameras that you've installed today, 5 years from now, are no longer being made, right? Even 3 years from now, no longer being made or supported. So I think the professional of tomorrow, right, really understands that the landscape is rapidly changing in all sectors, and really having that leader that understands that and grasps that is what's going to make it successful.
Fantastic. Well, thanks very much for jumping on. It's great to look at this topic in a slightly different angle, because we've got enough other panels that look at tech and things like that. So Jonathan and Armando, big virtual round of applause for you. Thank you very much. And I really hope you, the listener, enjoyed that in a slightly different format, because essentially we're remembering the event that we just ran on corporate security modernization in the tri-state being New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and for some reason Connecticut. Can anyone tell me why the tri-state has 4 states in it? I don't know. Maybe that's just me. Maybe I've misunderstood. Answers on a postcard. But on a more serious note, duty of care for the protector, it is more than the regulation. It is also considering their mental health. It's considering whether or not they want to work for you anymore. And, how do we hire the next generation? How do we keep the talent pipeline going? And I really appreciate Armando and Jonathan coming on and, looking at their varied backgrounds, how they've achieved that. Now, there are many ways that we can look out for one another this festive period. I suggest one way is to simply connect to someone that you haven't connected with in a while. Yeah, sure, that could be for a business reason, but that would also serve the purpose of just touching base, making sure they're okay. Obviously, it is a big community, so you can't reach out to everyone, but I think that especially this time of year, we should give a thought to our fellow colleagues and friends. Now, coming up, of course, in January, on the 25th of January, is our 9th annual Executive Security and Close Protection Technology Forum in the Grand Connaught Rooms in London. Absolutely amazing agenda already. It's already online. If anyone needs it, just, if you want, head to executivesecurity.mssconference.com or just, DM us and we'll send you the link. But that's a good place. That's a good touch point at the start of the year. I've said it to a few others. It doesn't clash with Davos, in case you were wondering. It is after Davos, so fear not. The usual spot where we don't clash with anything is still in motion. And I understand the IPSB is running pre-drinks the night before as well. And of course, we have our Honor group sponsored drinks after the event itself. So lots to play for. And of course, our BBA community have a special code. Look out for that on the app. And, we'll probably also email it to you. Duty of care, it's not the simple formula that perhaps we discussed in previous episodes. It's more detailed, more in-depth. And I really think that we should, I suppose, show a little kindness. Yeah? Big shout out to the kindness games, I suppose. We should show a little kindness and think of our fellow protector, our fellow colleague, and what they're going through, especially as some may be working this festive season. As always, we would be delighted to hear from you in the NABA Protector app and the BBA Connect app. We're always there, always listening. And if you have an article and you need to get the word out, you want to spread the message, we would love to incorporate your article in the next edition of the Circuit magazine itself. So, on behalf of Elijah, Sean and John, have a lovely Christmas, happy festive period, and we look forward to seeing you very soon.
You have been listening to the Circuit Magazine podcast. Be sure to subscribe and be sure to not miss an episode.